Ad min lol love is kom in das gechel. O ered manam shulach truach agach evo an viam. O Yasa toch love Kewin kach gavach kan. Have this your spirit and
It took us a number of years to pull together all the elements of the sanctuary here in St. Michael's Ardkenneth. Certain elements, of course, are permanent. One of the features are the pillars, which are of yellow pine and came off the cargo of a ship coming over from the Atlantic, which possibly took emigrants with it on the outward journey to North America. And the pillars have been manufactured really by two different people, both within the community here. And that frames the sanctuary. The first thing which I did was I realized that there wasn't a sufficiently prominent cross in the church. And I decided that we should do something different from what would be traditional in most other churches. So it's not a crucifixion scene. It's a depiction of Christ the High Priest. And the theology is very much of Christ the High Priest on the cross, Christ present in the tabernacle, Christ the sacrifice on the altar. So all three are in alignment together. And the cross itself was brought in from Udine in northeastern Italy. And it is, I think, a very serene presentation of our Saviour. And it's one which increasingly has become a subject of deep devotion for the people here within this parish. The sort of way in which I reckon things is when people cannot remember what they were like before, there's no hankering to go back the way. That, in other words, the renovation has been successful. Then we raised the level of the sanctuary. Then this same fellow, Neil MacDonald, built the altar. And the stained glass was done locally by a man called Jarlath Fenton, who was a physics teacher at Linnaclet School. And the representation there is of Christ, the Alpha and the Omega. And to my mind, at least, the sanctuary conveys a coherent whole of the representation of the mysteries of our faith, the central mysteries, the mysteries of the Eucharist in particular, and the mystery of the Word and the proclamation of the Word. And the sanctuary therefore has unity, to my mind, and what is called by the Second Vatican Council a noble simplicity. And I think, again, one has to see this in the context of the evolution of the representation, artistic representation of the mysteries of our faith. That it's not something which remains static and somebody will come after me, hopefully not, and replace it all. But the likelihood is that 100 years from now, it won't be what it is today in every detail. That's not what matters. What matters is, essentially what matters is the permanent nature of the sacramental life of the Church and the way in which it is represented. It is often a question of artistic taste. I think, too, that we move on to look at one of the modern depictions of articles of our faith done by Michael Gulfeder, he's one of our local artists and one of the best, in my opinion. He carried out this work on the depiction of St. Columba, St. Michael, and Our Lady as a school project, which when I came here, it was just lying about in the house, and I decided, no, this has to go up because it's brilliant. But it is very modern, and you have to look at it in that light. And I think that as a depiction of these three people or who are significant within our faith. It's very original. St. Michael, of course, is in many ways the saint of the Western Isles. We have a number of dedications to St. Michael, and that might appear to be unusual, but I think you have to go back into considering why the dedications to St. Michael took place. And this is essentially, in a simplistic way, to put it like this, is that the first missionaries who came upon a sort of druidic system of belief where there was good and evil. And what you try to do, therefore, is to link into what people already believe. So what you do is you present a saint who is all to do with the victory of good over evil. So St. Michael is an important saint in the whole life of the church here and in the devotional life of its people. A wee story in that regard: I am called Michael after St. Michael. My birthday is the day before his feast, and my little granny, who came from the island of Egg, where my mother and father wanted to call me either Colin or Angus after my two grandfathers, insisted no, he must be called Michael, because St. Michael is so important. So to all these Michaels out there, remember, in the Western Isles in particular, he is the number one saint.
There are areas of Scotland which have always maintained the Catholic faith. We think of the northeast of Scotland, the famous Ingy area in Banffshire, where there are certain areas which never took to the Reformed faith at all. And the same is true also of the Western Highlands and parts of the Western Isles. South Uist is one such example where the Catholic faith always remained. But that doesn't mean to say that the people had an easy time of it. I'm the parish priest also of St. Peter's here in South Uist, and we also have the Chapel of Ease, Our Lady of Sorrows, in the township of Garrynamony. Now, two churches which serve a very small area, but a populous area in terms of the Hebrides. We have quite a population here in the south end of South Uist served by those two churches. Perhaps much less than the population 100 years ago. Perhaps that population has halved since then. But nevertheless, the faith is a very important part of the people's lives here. And the churches, as you can see, are well maintained. Why is it that this island, as well as other islands and parts of the mainland, the Highland and northeast part of our country, why is it that they retained this Catholic faith? Well, there are different reasons. First of all, here in the Hebrides, there was a linguistic barrier. It was difficult for the Church of Scotland at the beginning, the new Reformed Church, to send Gaelic-speaking missionaries out here. They didn't have them at all. And of course, we have that principle that whoever's in charge, his religion or her religion is maintained. So here, the clan chiefs remained Catholic until very late on, and that meant it was difficult for Protestant missionaries to have access to these areas too. It was easy then for the people to keep that faith. But there came a time as well when the landlords did become Protestant. They rejected their Catholic faith because there were laws in place which meant that if they didn't accept the new faith, they risked losing their territories. They would have no inheritance to pass on to further generations. That meant that when they converted, there was pressure on the people to convert. But the faith, the Catholic faith, was so deeply rooted that the people rebelled against that. There was pressure put on them from the landlords to conform to the new faith, but they didn't. They held firm, they held fast, and we still have that heritage today here in the Western Isles. So this is a parish of St. Peter's in Dalabra, and it serves the southern half of South Uist. We have here two townships, one called Kilbride and the other Kilfeter, and those come from Gaelic names. Many of the place names here are Norse, from the Viking inheritance. But we have those two names in Gaelic meaning the Church of St. Bride and the Church of St. Peter. So we know that there were early foundations here dedicated to St. Bride, a much beloved patron of the Celtic peoples, as well as a church dedicated to St. Peter. This church doesn't stand in the original spot where St. Peter's Church was, but there was a church here in years past, a church which was much smaller than the one we're in just now. This new church was built around it in the 1800s, and then the old church was dismantled here within, and the new church consecrated for public worship. This church, like so many others, has undergone various renovations over the years. The climate here in the Hebrides is quite cruel at times. We have a lot of wind and rain, so there's much maintenance to undertake looking after our buildings. The people, of course, being a people of great faith, are very generous in maintaining their churches. The churches mean a lot to them in their daily lives, and of course to mark the great events of life itself, baptisms, marriages, and our funerals. So these are very special places in the hearts of our people. So a lot of effort is put into making sure that they are fit places for the worship of Almighty God. In 2019, the church was renovated again. It was in need of a new roof, and we managed to achieve that. And then we rewired the interior, putting new lighting in as well as new windows, and we painted the interior. Now, the colour scheme we've chosen is actually the colour scheme of the Uist flag. Various islands have their own flags, and ours is a Nordic cross on a green background with a blue cross in the centre as well. So we've chosen blue for the ceiling. Again, we have that theme of the stars there, how the worship of God opens up for us heaven. What we celebrate in the sacraments opens heaven for us. And we've kept that theme also in the scene that we see behind this beautiful big crucifix we have here. Not the original crucifix from the first church that was built, but one that was installed later on. And in times past there have been other scenes painted here, but I chose to paint a scene from the graveyard in Uist. There was a priest here called Father George Rigg at the turn of the 20th century, so the late 1800s, beginning of the 1900s, and attending to victims of an outbreak here. He himself also fell ill, and because of that illness he died. So he literally offered his life in the service of the people. Now, Father George Rigg is buried in Hallen, the graveyard here in South Uist, and I went there to take a picture of the view from his grave to remind us that the sacrifice we celebrate here at Holy Mass, the sacrifice of Calvary, which is renewed at each Mass on our altars, must in some way be replicated in our own lives as Christians, just as it was in the ministry and priesthood of Father George Rigg. So we have here a scene of the hills of South Uist and Loch Hallen itself, looking out towards the hills on the east coast of the island. And it reminds us also that our faith is incarnate in a particular environment, a particular context. Here, the crucifix is rooted on the Machair, the western coast of Uist, reminding us that our Christian faith is incarnate in our environment, in our language, in our culture, and in our context. So we have that scene painted there to remind us of that. We also have the diocesan coat of arms and the coat of arms of the Holy See as well, all framed off. One of the only original artistic features of the church, as it was years ago, is the inscription above the altar on the arch there, which reminds us that the bread of angels is made for us, the bread of travellers too.
Ha'n chdiawn sioch magra chamas yn gdys yn ffwr. O ysahig gamier I tra a fat o moramadie. A caf a gorym gynji gynwa. Ys mi laf ddiwt